So now we have from Virginia the political analyst Joe Macaron, and we have from Delaware President Trump's Delaware campaign head Rob Arlett. So welcome, my dear guests. Mr. Arlett, please let me start with you. These protests that we have seen in some American cities, some of them, they are carrying weapons, and they are, against the coronavirus, the confinement and the measures. Some people, they say that if Mr. Trump do you think that Mr. Trump and his position maybe encouraged these people to go out with weapons in the streets?
I would say no. I think that the American people have been very patient, I would say, with the pandemic and the governments, from as well as President Trump, as well as each of the governors. But I think in many cases, the governors have overstepped their boundaries and overstepped their reach. And I say that specifically even here in Delaware, LA, Michigan, and also Virginia specifically. But when we started this pandemic and the stay-at-home orders, I will say here in Delaware, our governor chose to shut down and close gun shops. However, he kept open flower shops. So one had the ability to purchase flowers for their spouse, like myself, but I could not go purchase a firearm or ammunition to protect my family. So I think there has been some overreach, and I think the American people have been very patient. But as time continues on, I will tell you that they will continue to ask questions. They want transparency, and ultimately they want to get back to work and providing for their families. And I think that's what the goal here is for individuals that had taken their rights away to provide for their families. They want to get back and provide for their families yet again. And I think ultimately that's what we all want.
So, Joe, welcome also. Do you think that the governors, maybe they crossed the lines and they over-exaggerated? Or maybe, these demonstrations, they are not huge numbers if we compare them to those who are staying at home. Do you think that there is an exaggeration in these measures by the governors, or maybe the position of Mr. Trump encouraged them to do so? Unfortunately, Mr. Trump changed this, health crisis. He made it into like a war between the American people. It's like, the Americans, they care a lot about weapons. So, since the start, of course, Mr. Trump denied that there is this virus and that it is killing people. But now, when he says like liberate Virginia and liberate the other states, Mr. Trump, by doing that, this is dangerous. And this, like some people, they are blaming him for that. The voters, when he said that we want to reopen the economy now. So opening the economy now will lead to the increase of the cases, the infected cases, and it will be a burden on the health sector. So we need to listen to the scientists and not to the instincts of politicians, and to surpass this crisis and some states, they are trying to open again, but some other states, they are still, working on it. But we cannot, open that quickly. And there is the High Court that can, maybe that can decide about that. Let's not make, divisions between the Americans, especially in this election year, which is very important. So some people, Mr. Arlett and also Joe, some people are saying that this needs maybe more time. The Americans, of course, they were patient, but they need to be patient more, maybe not for a long time. Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York, he said that we surpassed, the biggest phase, and now all the indications show that we are, going, or it is going slow now in the state. So this, we need to work more, which means that if we keep these measures, then, things will get better. So he is maybe calling the New Yorkers, and he is telling them to please stay at home. so we will not face another wave of coronavirus, Mr. Arlett. So we are talking about the epicenter of, we are talking about the US. You know, there are 40,000 deaths, and we are talking about more than 750,000 infected people, and there is no cure yet, no vaccine. Isolation is the only solution. What do you think of that?
Well, I would disagree with that statement that isolation is the only solution. Let's be very clear. I think the president has been very clear, and I think even governors understand the fact that you have to learn how to do both. I think we as Americans appreciate and value our freedoms. Along with that freedom ultimately comes responsibility. And I agree with the statement that we have to look at the numbers and look at the facts, and ultimately science will determine a pathway to reopening America, and I think that's what we have to continue to focus on. Again, originally regarding Governor Cuomo out of New York, he stated that he needed 40,000 respirators. Ultimately, to date, they have used about 5,000. So I think that originally we as Americans perhaps reacted to a worst case scenario. We now have data at our disposal. We now know who can get affected, who is most vulnerable, and I think we have to now use common sense and respond with responsibility to opening up slowly and methodically our economy, as well as protecting those that are most vulnerable. President understands that. I believe that many of the governors are starting to understand that, and we all have to work together. But the reality is we are paying attention to the numbers, and let me be also very, very clear. Yes, all lives matter, those in the hospital that are fighting off for their lives with this pandemic, but at the same time, people that are shut in at their own homes and their ability to provide for their families has stricken their ability to provide for their families. And I think some people are understanding that we have to start learning and start caring about those people as well, because ultimately they have to provide for their families, and also the emotional and physiological viewpoint from those that are being shut in and away from having the ability to produce for their families. I think we can do both. I think we must do both, and I think that's what's ultimately going to be responsible as we open back up our economy and the American way.
Joe, this is important what Mr. Arlett was talking about. He said that the reaction was maybe built on the worst scenario, the worst case scenario, you know. So today we have data, we have numbers,
yes,
and it is less than the worst scenario. So some people, they say that these measures maybe they were, you know, exaggerated. And now we should study or assess how to go back to natural or to the normal life. What do you think of that? I think, yes, we can, talk about how to deal with the priorities. Is it the economy or the health of the people? No, Mr. Joe, I didn't mean that. What I meant, that all these, precautions and measures to stop life, they were built on the worst case scenario. Some scientists, they say that we didn't enter into this scenario. It is now better than the worst scenario, so now we have to reassess these measures. Yes, the estimates, they were saying that maybe 100,000 deaths or 200,000 deaths. So, yes, they were, precautionary measures or preemptive measures. But the problem is that you don't know if there were like some travelers who came in that period. So there were a lot of factors, unknown factors. So we should, or we had to take these precautionary measures. Of course, the hospitals here couldn't, take care of the huge numbers like in Europe and so on. But now I think that the measures of the administration, they helped in dealing with this matter. So can we now lift all these measures and or keep the Americans at home? There are some people who go for shopping. Of course, Mr. Arlett was talking about, of course, some people who are, buying flowers and so on. The scientists, they say that until now we shouldn't rush into opening everything too soon. Maybe, next month some states will take some measures. But I think that we should, at least for 2 weeks, to see what's going on, if there is no rise in the numbers. Because, in the end, yes, there is, of course, a financial impact which is huge on the economy, but any health impact will be very bad for the American economy. Mr. Arlett, now the question that we always ask regarding this virus, when should we lift these measures, and who decides if we have to ease the measures? Are they the specialists, scientists, or the experts in viral diseases, or the politicians and economics and governors and heads of states? Who in the end decides and said that this is now the time to ease these measures?
I think ultimately the decision is going to lie by the elected officials, because here in America, it's we the people who select and vote in the elected officials to make good, sound decisions in the best interest of the people. I think any governor, and as well as the president has done, they need to surround themselves with the experts, not just the medical, but also I think all facets of, that's why they're leaders. I think leaders need to lead. I think they have to make good decisions, good quality decisions based on facts. And I think that's what we are seeing now is, again, I think we need to shift our phase from reaction to responding responsibly. And I think it'll be a phased opening up of various states and also throughout the nation. Again, we need to think nationally, but we need to act locally. That's what I am imploring on all of our governors. And as our president has stated, he believes that it needs to be up to the individual governors to make their decisions based on what's best for their states. And I implore all of our governors to look at each of their counties and look at the raw data to determine where are the issues. And if there's no issues in a particular town or a city, they should open up with responsibilities and be safe. Keep the 6 feet apart distancing, perhaps using some face masks and alike. But again, we need to be smart about this, but we need to start looking at solutions of how to open back up the economy, because again, people that are being shut into their home with no ability to provide for their families is a desperate situation, in addition to those that are in the hospital. I think we can do both, and again, we must do both. It's not a one or the other, but I would implore all of our governors and elected officials to do both. That's being responsible.
What do you think of that? The elected people, as Mr. Arlett says, they are the one who decides because they were elected by the people, so it's up to them. Some people, they say that in the end, this is a scientific issue and a medical issue. So, it doesn't have to be a politician who can decide that. It is related to the health of people. So it's not the governors who take the decision. What do you make of that, Mr. Joe? I think that, yes, the elected person, he decides, he makes the final decision. But of course, he has to talk to the medical teams and to the experts in the other fields. But in the end, yes, of course, every head of state or every governor, he has the right, to decide to open the state to protect the people and so on. That's what we saw in Germany, what the Chancellor Angela Merkel made with this, easing the measures. She made it when she talked to, to the experts in the medical field and so on. So, but in the end, it is the governor, yes, the elected people, they are the ones who decide and make the final decision. Mr. Arlett, I would like to go back and ask you again, maybe the first question. To what extent do you think these protesters who are in the streets and they are carrying guns and weapons, we saw some people, they are carrying Kalashnikovs and, many rifles, and they were not wearing masks. So it's like a challenge. They were challenging. To what extent do you think that the speech of Mr. Trump encourages them, and the media of Mr. Trump, like Fox News and so on, they are encouraging these people there were calls, clear calls in this media to get out and to call for freedom and so on. To what extent these protesters are, affected by these positions?
Well, I think they're affected very, very much. But I think, again, it's the people have patience. And when they no longer have trust in the politicians and their intent, and I'll use Virginia as the example, the pandemic and what the Virginia governor is doing, trying to take away the gun rights of his citizens during a pandemic is a really big problem. And again, I think that's why you're seeing various people rise up and challenge the elected officials, because they're not trusting the decision-making process of those elected officials. And I want to repeat, if I may, also, we talk about the experts, the medical experts, right, making those decisions. Let us not forget your audience that back on January the 14th of this year, the so-called experts of the WHO had stated and reaffirmed at that time that this pandemic, or I should say, not the pandemic at that time, but just the virus, could not be transmitted from person to person. So the experts, quote unquote, at the WHO got it vastly wrong. And again, I think they have to be held accountable, as do other medical individuals around the world. They got to get it right. And when people don't trust them, why should the elected officials start to trust just because they say it? Doesn't make it true, as in the example of WHO back in January. So again, I think getting back to your point, I think that people have been patient. They're going to call out the elected officials when they think that their rights are being taken and being stricken. And again, we have a First Amendment here in America, so people have the right of freedom of speech. And of course, the Second Amendment is what? The ability to bear arms, and that is, of course, guns. And that's more so to hold back the government and keep them in check, as well as protecting we, the people, and our families. I think that's what you're seeing from the American people. So I would implore the governors to be wise, to be smart, and ease open back up our economy so people can start providing for themselves. And again, that's called responsibility.
So you are saying, Mr. Arlett, that the WHO made a mistake. Of course,
oh, absolutely.
I will not disagree with you with that. Of course, WHO maybe made mistakes, but also, Mr. Trump, didn't he make a mistake when he said this is just like a flu, because we have only 5 or 10 people, and it will disappear soon, and the economy will be good. So the mistakes, they were made also by President Trump. Despite that, Mr. Trump, he has maybe better advisors than the WHO. And he has also, of course, the CIA, the intelligence. And some people, they say that many warnings were told to him, to Mr. Trump, about the pandemic, but he didn't care about that. What do you make of that?
I would disagree. I think the president has shown a tremendous amount of leadership, as exampled back in January, towards the end of January. Despite what the WHO was saying, President Trump was important and focused on protecting the American people. So he shut down travel from China back here to the U.S. other than U.S. citizens, but he shut down travel, and even his own advisors suggested he did not do that. But he felt it was important, just in case, to your point, that he did that. And again, that was a very wise decision that the president made. He probably saved tens of thousands of Americans. And I think as we learn more about the facts, as facts became known.
Sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Arlett. We just want to show some pictures.
Sure.
These are direct or live pictures from Colorado, when we see some protesters here in the streets. So we are seeing like hundreds of people who are protesting in Colorado.
Yes.
So protests are everywhere. So stay with us, Mr. Arlett. We are just, he's just showing the pictures and live images from Colorado of protesters.
No problem.
So stay with us, please. Stay with us. Yeah, he just, saying that they are against, of course, the quarantine, and they want to reopen the economy again. Yes.
I'm here, all good.
Thank you very much. So now, Joe, I would like you to comment maybe if you can see these pictures. Of course, we see limited number of people who are protesting, but we saw many protesters in many states in the U.S. Do we expect that these protests will grow more and more? I think if we still have these political divisions in the US, maybe, maybe we will see a rise in the numbers, yes. And if we talk about the weapons and sorry, because the sound is very bad from his side, Mr. Arlett. I'm just trying to grasp what he is saying.
No.
So we are entering an important phase. We are losing him. I think the voice, the sound is very bad. So
I'm happy. I'm happy to answer that question.
Are saying some people are, of course. Sorry to interrupt you because the sound is very bad, Mr. Joe. We will try to call you maybe back again. The sound is bad. I will go back to Mr. Arlett. So, Mr. Arlett, now with, of course, the coming of the conferences of the parties and, of course, the election in November, will we expect maybe some extreme positions from the two parties? Because some people they are calling for reopening the economy, and some people they are calling for keeping these measures to protect the people. What do you make of that?
Well, I think again we need to do both. We need to understand and find solutions of how to responsibly open back up our economy and allow people to provide for themselves. I think we can do both, and at the same time protecting those that are most at risk. I think there's going to be a shift from most essential businesses to non-essential businesses, to focusing on the people, meaning those that are most at risk versus those who are not at a high risk. And I think we need to understand how to do that. We need to have the conversations of how we can do that responsibly. And I think to your point and to your question to the other guests, we will absolutely see more protesting going on around the nation. Absolutely, yes, 100% confident of that. I say that because, again, getting back down to my original point, when you tell the people that you must be shut in your home, I think today is day 26 here at the stay-at-home order in Delaware. Day 26 of that, people are going to start to question what are we doing and how do we move forward more and more and more. Again, I think we need to focus on doing both, protecting our most vulnerable, at the same time opening back up our economy, and allowing people the freedom to go out and produce an income and provide for themselves in a very responsible way. And I'm very confident we can do that. And I'm imploring all of our elected officials to start having the conversation of how do we do both. It's not one or the other, but it is both. And I think that's what we have to do as a society. And I think that's what we have to do, I think, really from around the world. I think people need to start having a conversation. How do we do it? It's not going to be exactly as it was before. What I mean by that is we're not going to have the total freedom. We're not going to see 100,000 people showing up at a football game, next week. At the same time, I think it makes complete sense that we have the ability to open things back up in a very responsible way. And I think it's going to take some time to do that. We all have to learn how to do that as a society. But I welcome and implore everybody to start that discussion of how we can do so.
Let me ask you also about the gun, the people who are going to the protests with guns, they are carrying guns. Of course, I understand that this is, a constitutional right for the American people.
Yes.
But why do they carry guns in these protests if the goal is to call for reopening the economy and easing the measures? So why are they carrying the guns?
I think it's a great question, and I think I would ask the governor of Virginia, why was he trying to take away gun rights during a closed down government? Again, the Virginia government is shut down. They're not in session. So why is the governor making decisions without his own government being open and without the people having a voice? I think that's why you're seeing frustration from the people, is because you have some elected officials that are taking a tragedy and trying to make decisions in their own personal best interest or political best interest, I should say. And I think that's why you're seeing the uproar of some people showing their guns and being visual about holding the elected officials accountable. I think a better question is, why is the governor of Virginia and some other elected officials using a tragedy like this trying to take away rights, I think, of the people? I think that's a better question to ask of the governor of Virginia and perhaps our guest who lives in Virginia. And I think also that's why President Trump, if you recall, some time ago, he made a national statement that gun stores are essential and that they needed to stay open. Again, because some governors were overreaching their powers and overreaching the Second Amendment and shutting things down because perhaps it was a political decision and not a decision focused on a pandemic. And I think we have to have a balance, but a focus needs to be on the Constitution and our Bill of Rights in America, as well as each of the constitutions that each of our 50 states have. That should be a focus of how one governs, because ultimately that's how we're held accountable, is by our constitutions. And I think what you're seeing is a rise of the people that are reminding the elected officials that they have to be held accountable and be responsible in their decision making and do not take away rights that are beyond the Constitution. I think that's all you're seeing. I don't think anybody has any desire to go out and do any harm for anybody. They're just showing a visual to remind the various elected officials ultimately who's in charge, and it's the Constitution, and ultimately it's we the people that are in charge, because we elect these elected officials.
Of course, the gun issue is a long and it's a difficult issue. Of course, we will talk about it always.
Yes.
More and more about, of course, weapons and the rights of weapons and the killings and, and so on.
Sure.
We will take maybe about that. Joe, do you think that there will be more polarization inside the American society because of the COVID-19? And do you think that it will be politicized more and more in the coming days? I think it will be politicized, yes. But of course, when we get out of this crisis, we will get into the election, campaigns and so on. And if Joe Biden and Mr. Trump, if they decide maybe to go head to head, and to make a debate, this will be made by video if this crisis continue. But Mr. Trump, of course, he wants to put blame always on China, on the governors of the states, and on the Democrats, which will lead his, his base and strengthen the opinion or the people who are with him. So I think that like Ohio and Virginia and Minnesota, these states, Mr. Trump, he understands, the politics very well. Some people, they don't know that. Every statement he makes, he is very wise, he calculates very well. So maybe that's why he gave the governors these rights. So if anything goes wrong, then they are the ones who will be held responsible. But all of this will go on, and of course, so that's the point. Yeah. Of course, we will continue with this issue in the U.S. And as you mentioned, Joe, that it will maybe more politicized in the coming days. Just to remind you with the numbers, now we are crossing 40,000 deaths today, and we crossed also 750,000 infected people in the U.S. Shukran. Thank you very much, Joe Macaron, the political analyst from Virginia, and thank you also to Rob Arlett, the President Trump's Delaware campaign head from Delaware. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Arlett. Thank you. You have a good day, sir.
Likewise. Thank you so much. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Stay safe. Corona.